family-owned Buick GMC dealership in Kansas City for over 31 years and counting. The biggest rebates of the year and 0% for up to 72 months on Terrains, Acadias, Canyons, and all Sierras. Don't buy some other dealer's leftovers. We have hard-to-find 2021 GMC Sierras, Yukons, and Sierra Heavy Duties arriving daily. Reserve yours today. It will show up wrapped in plastic with your name on it. Check us out at reedbuickgmc.com. Reed Auto Group is values-driven.
Your home for the NFL Draft. Sports Radio 810, WHB.
He is one of the greatest quarterback prospects I've ever evaluated. I think you would put him up there with Andrew Luck.
The second pick is an even more desirable pick because the quarterback is that desirable in Zach Wilson.
I think 49ers really have a chance to distance themselves in the NFC West if they get the quarterback position right.
Exclusive live coverage of the NFL Draft begins Thursday, April 29th on Sports Radio 810. WHB.
My boyfriend proposed with his grandmother's ring. It's stunning, but I just wasn't sure what wedding band would work with it. So we went to Shane Company to look at their huge selection. We knew we'd have a ton of options. The jewelry consultant helping us had a lot of great suggestions. She showed me different wedding bands that would work with my ring. Vintage bands, contour bands, floral bands. She had ideas I hadn't even thought of. I ended up getting 2 decorative diamond bands. They frame my heirloom ring beautifully, and the new bands give it an updated, elegant look with even more sparkle. I love it. My fiancé needed his wedding band too. After looking at all the classic styles like 14-karat gold and platinum, it was actually a band in a unique metal called T
the first number
that caught his eye.
That's what I'm calling.
Durable and totally fits his style. Shane Company made it so easy and fun for us to shop for our wedding bands. Now we're all set for the big day.
Now you have a friend in the jewelry business. Shane Company and ShaneCo.com.
Save big money on your next project with 11% off everything right now at Menards. Give a beautiful, rich color to your projects with Minwax Wood Finish. Minwax is a penetrating...
Hope he stays on.
All types of wood. All quarts and gallons are 11% off. And 11% off everything now at Menards. Good May 1st. Savings are a mail-in rebate, so exclusions apply. See store for details.
Save big money at Menards.
This is Doug Gottlieb of the Doug Gottlieb Show, and you're listening to The Ship with Darren Smith on Sports Radio 810 WHB, Kansas City.
Welcome back to The Ship here, live on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I'm Darren Smith, and I am joined by a very special guest, good friend. He is the National Football League's Player Association Executive Director, Mr. DeMaurice Smith. Good morning to you, sir.
Hey, good morning, Darren. Darren, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so very much. Look, I got a lot of questions, so we're going to just jump right into things. The last time you were on the show for an extended period of time was last year. It was about 11 months or so ago when the tragic death of George Floyd took place. I had you on a few weeks later. I think the week after, Patrick Mahomes, Tyrann Mathieu, and a few other players contributed to the Black Lives Matter video. Want to know what your thoughts were as it relates to the verdict that took place this week, and did you feel as the head of the players' union that your players used their voices to speak out, not only on this particular matter but others as well over the past year, pushing Americans to take part in the political process of voting as well?
Well, look, Darren, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I look at what happened with respect to the verdict as something that was supposed to happen in response to something that should have never happened. George Floyd should have never lost his life. The hundreds of other people who've been the victims of police shootings, many of those cases should have never, ever, ever happened, if not all of them. And with respect to the verdict, I was a homicide prosecutor for a very long time. And I do believe that the criminal justice system can work. But it can only work if good people decide to take ownership of the process and involve themselves in the process. And that is exactly why making sure that our players are involved in using their voice, making sure that players are involved in the criminal justice system as people who want to change it and make it better. and people who decide that they're going to use their power to elect responsible Americans who believe in our system. I think that all of those things become necessary primarily because we first have to make sure that things like what happened to Mr. Floyd never happened in the first place.
I got to ask, you were on TV this past week and you talked about the NFL using their power to make changes in communities. And I know, like you said, to an extent, you want them as well to look at elected officials and get the right ones in place. Because the players and the league and the union took such a strong stance on voting this past election cycle, do you feel that as the head of the NFL union, along with the NFL, you all should come out strongly and use your political capital to push legislators to pass H.R. 1 and Senate 1 to get the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed?
I do, and that's why we've signed on to that months ago. We're a part of the Alliance for Criminal Justice Reform, and I think it's important for organizations to use their power. But Darren, let's not forget, less than half of the Americans voted, right? And there are certainly barriers that are being erected in order to prevent people from voting. But you and I have been around long enough to know that that's not the main cause for the majority of Americans not voting, right?
Yes.
We need to eliminate those barriers. We need to tear down those barriers, and we're going to focus a tremendous amount of our effort into tearing down these barriers. But we need all Americans of voting age to take ownership of them being indispensable to a functioning democracy. And sometimes, we focus on a lot of the issues, and I'm not saying those things aren't important, but I would hate to be in a world where we have torn down every barrier. And yet we are still looking at a group of people who, for some reason, feel disconnected with the political system or feel that they cannot make change. That's important.
We're joined by DeMaurice Smith, the National Football League's Player Association Executive Director, right here on the ship, here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. DeMaurice, I want to move over to obviously what's been going on over the last couple of weeks. Players from a number of teams have decided to opt out or boycott voluntary camp that is taking place or that will take place. Why is this an important issue for the union and its players at the moment?
Yeah, I'm really careful word-wise. This isn't a boycott. The off-season workouts are voluntary.
Okay.
And in the same way that you and I, just got done talking about taking ownership and taking accountability and being responsible, I want, as I've always wanted, our players to be accountable, responsible, and to make the best decisions that are in their interest as a man in the business of football. And what we saw last year, after we jointly agreed to cancel the entire offseason, we saw a 30% reduction in overall injuries. We saw a larger than 20% reduction in concussions. And we saw all of those things because we did not have a voluntary off-season workout. And so the league this year has made a decision that even though we are still in the grips of this pandemic, they did not want to agree to cancel off-season workouts. And by the way, the primary reason why the league refuses to agree to that is every time during collective bargaining, they said, well, to the players, or well, there's no reason to cancel it because it's voluntary. And if players don't want to go, they shouldn't go. So, it's rich that the league would be relying on the voluntary nature of off-season workouts in order to support their decision to not cancel them. And yet we know that there's been tremendous pressure on players when they decide to exercise that voluntary decision as a man, right? And so at the end of the day, I think that every player needs to take stock, first and foremost, at the last time they were purely involved in the game of football, they were in high school. This is a great game, but just like the draft this week, and I know it's going to be exciting, and I know it's going to be fun, but there is nothing more indicative of the business of football than a process by which people are assigned to a team coming out of college. And we agree to the draft because it also means that everybody who gets drafted, they get a minimum salary, they get health care protection, they get all the protections of the collective bargaining agreement. No one can be preyed upon by general managers or agents, and that's the trade-off. But at the same time that everybody is thrilled about the draft, we spend time with our young men telling them, welcome to the business of the NFL. And if you believe for a moment that somehow you are coming into some kind of NFL family, you are setting yourself up to get your feelings hurt real quick.
I'm glad you talked on that because that's where we're going right now. When you look, because you have the draft coming up this week, will you also encourage rookies to opt out of participating in voluntary workouts, knowing that they are the ones that need to work the most, including the quarterbacks?
Well, when you say that they are the ones who need to work the most, you're talking about the game, right?
Well, the game, obviously, for example, if Trevor Lawrence gets drafted number 1 to Jacksonville Jaguars, he's going to need to kind of work out with the players and get the playbook and study and do that type of stuff and work out with his teammates.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm being somewhat rhetorical. But when you say the word need, right, you're talking about the game of football.
Yes.
Right? In what sport? In what business do young men come into a business fully trained to conduct that business because of 4 years of a job of college football? And when you say need, what do they really need to do? If it was up to football people and coaches and general managers, they would have every rookie player in an NFL camp from the day they left college until they snapped the ball for the regular season, right? If there were no rules on how much time a coach could keep a rookie player at a team, you and I both know every coach and GM would say they need to be there in order to become ready to play the game. Well, I would like our players to make the decision about what they need to do. That's what it means to be a professional. And guys like Tom Brady know that no one makes the team during OTAs. Guys like J.C. Tretter have said no one makes the team running around in shorts during the offseason. What you need to do, Darren, is to be healthy by the time you get to minicamp. And what you need to do is to be healthy by the time you get to training camp. Because we know that the single most determinative factor about whether a veteran makes an opening day roster is whether he has suffered a missed time injury during the offseason. So if someone came to you and said that there was a 23% chance that you were going to get injured in such a way that you couldn't do your show, someone would come to you and they would say, I think Darren doesn't need to do that, right? And for all of us, I get the game and I love the game, but there are a lot of things that we have done in football over the last 10, 15 years that are completely unnecessary. And when you look at last year, where we had no off season, no mini camps, right? Can anyone tell me, after looking at the great season we had last year, that all of those things are indispensable? We had the highest scoring season in the history of the National Football League. We had thriller games all season, not to mention we got through 256 of those games during the worst pandemic in most of our lifetimes. I think if there was ever one simple experiment in order to determine what we need and what we don't need in football, last year demonstrated we do not need 4,500 players showing up during off-season workouts where we allow coaches and general managers to make people survive until they get to training camp.
So do you believe... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so if we were talking about our son or our daughter in this business, and you had one system where it was set up as a survival system, where you needed to stay healthy and go through the grind in order to get to training camp so that you could try out for the team. Or a system where you, where the focus was, how do you keep yourself in great shape and decrease the exposure to injury so you could show up at training camp to try out for the team? What father wouldn't want, or what mother wouldn't want a system where it's not based on a survival system?
I get it. But my question, so then my follow would be, do you believe OTA should be eliminated altogether, or does it have to be collectively bargained?
Well, they're voluntary, Darren. So why wouldn't we just have players make the decision to themselves about what's in their best interest?
Well, but I'm saying, but you did talk about, the mini camps and stuff that did not take place last year. I think only training camp did. So would you eliminate those as well?
You mean mini camp?
Yes.
Possibly, but I think that the first thing is, why wouldn't we take advantage of every player's collectively bargained right not to go do something that's voluntary and for free? Let's not forget that part, right? We have less than 250 players who have off-season money tied to attending voluntary off-season workouts. Less than 250. If you're one of those 250 who've collectively bargained your right into getting a bonus to attend off-season workouts, go get your bonus. That's like overtime, right? If you are a person who is not getting paid to attend a voluntary workout and exposing yourself to injury before training camp, I think the first focus that we would want any player to do is to take advantage of his collectively bargained right to say no.
Well, I do want to ask you this then, because you didn't really have to worry about OTAs last year. You didn't have to worry about mini camp. You just had training camp, but you didn't have any preseason games. And as you mentioned, still the highest scoring season in NFL history. The league has already moved to 17 games. We had that conversation last year that was collectively bargained. But after last year's success, do you believe that we should no longer have preseason games going further?
I think there's always a yin and a yang in this business, right? And my job is to represent everyone. What you'll hear from what you see in football now is most veterans not playing after the second preseason game, right? You see a lot of young players playing. The league and the teams love preseason games because as a season ticket holder, you have to buy the preseason games as a part of your package. You don't have the choice not to pay for preseason, right? And then the third constituency is you have a number of young players who I think rightly say, I would not have made the team if I didn't have, that preseason game or those preseason games in order to show my skills. So I think the right way to think about preseason games is what's that balance between coaches who are smartly not risking their veteran players playing in preseason games, and the balance of coaches who are using those games in order to develop and identify talent so that they can make decisions on how some younger players make the team.
You talked about, the league going to 17 games, and again, that was collectively bargained. But do you see a scenario where the owners are going to try to move to 18 games? I know in the recent years. Go ahead.
Yeah, they can't. They're barred by the collective bargaining agreement.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Of course, they waited to announce the new TV deals for the 17th game. If the players want to get anything in significance from the owners, maybe between now and the end of this deal or in the next collective bargaining agreement, what is it that the players will want the owners to give up for them this time around to have that 18th game?
I can't conceive of. Well, I can only recommend what the players would do. I don't, given our current system where we achieve 20% increases for every player, increased the pensions for former players, brought players that you and I used to watch when we were kids up to current standards for pensions, built out ways to improve their health care after football is over, achieved another 10 years of paying pensions to players when most businesses in America are getting rid of pensions. I don't know what I would recommend to the players that would be worth another game. The league collectively bargained for a 17th game. In essence, they bought a game from the players that they had for free in 2011, prior to 2011. But I don't know what I would ever recommend to the players to do in order to play an 18th game.
Here is my question to you then. I'm a union guy through and through, so I always support the little guy against the big guy. That's just who I am. It's just my nature. And so I know you have a tough job to do, and I respect that. But and we've had this conversation before, and we'll continue to have it today and in the future. But why is it so hard with the amount of money the NFL, these owners make, that the players cannot get a lifetime health care pension? I know in Major League Baseball, they play one day, you qualify for lifetime health care. You're 43 days on a roster, you qualify for a pension, lifetime pension. Why is it so hard for owners and for a sport that makes, at least over the next 10 years, just from TV contracts, $113 billion, why can players not get, why can the Players Union not get lifetime health care benefits or a pension program or lifetime pension?
Well, you do get a lifetime pension if you vest. So let's unpack that a little bit, right? Okay. Let's take a guy like Tony Clark, who is the executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. And I think sometimes when people compare baseball to football, unfortunately, they gloss over a lot of facts. Tony Clark had a tremendous career as a pro. The reality is also Tony Clark spent nearly 4 years in the minors before he got the first at-bat that guaranteed him the pension that he got, right? So instead of saying that every major league player gets X after their first at-bat, the facts demonstrate that virtually all MLB players have to languish for 4 to 5 years in the minors before they even get that chance. So when you look at it that way, at what point did MLB player vest? You would say contractually he vested after his first at-bat. In reality, he vested after 4 years in the minors, then his first at-bat, right? So now you take a look at all of the people who languished in the minors for 4 or 5 years, earning comparatively chiclets compared to what's going on in Major League Baseball. They're languishing there without a union. They languish without minimum salaries. They languish there without health care. They languish there without the benefits of the union. How many people never made it to that first at bat? So which system would you rather choose? A system like ours, where after 2 years and 1 game, you fully vest as a veteran. The minute that you are drafted into the National Football League, you are guaranteed a minimum salary of no less than $600,000. It comes along with the health care. If you get injured at work, you are covered. Which system would you prefer? So when it comes to lifetime health care, there's one significant difference between our sport and almost every other sport, and that's the injury rate. When you price out the cost of lifetime health care, and let's separate it from injury care for a second, lifetime health care, you are talking about an amount into the billions of dollars per year. If the players ever wanted to do that, they could. It would just come off the salary cap. Now, the salary cap would probably be around $120 million a year in order to pay for the insurance policy. But that's the question, right? But let's talk about injury care, because, again, sometimes the conversation just gets lost between the facts. Every player in the National Football League has at his disposal lifetime injury care. Injury care comes from workers' compensation, just like every person in America has access to workers' compensation. That workers' compensation, if you file and timely file, most states, almost every state in the country, provides you lifetime health care for the injuries you suffer at work. So we can have a system where a player gets lifetime health care that might not cover the injuries, right? Because when you go to the doctor, and again, this is just reality, every person out there who goes to the doctor and you fill out the form for the first time, you're going to see your doctor about some sort of medical condition that you have. You and I have seen that box on the form.
Yes.
That says, did you suffer this injury at work? Right? And if you check that box, yes, your health insurance company is likely to say no. Because most healthcare policies have an exclusion for injuries that are suffered at work. Why? Because of workers' compensation. So the focus of every NFL player should be to file and win workers' compensation cases, because then they do get lifetime coverage for the injuries that they suffer at work. And that's why we, the NFLPA, have a pool of at least 2, in most cases 3, workers' comp lawyers that are affiliated with the NFLPA. I bring them to every NFLPA meeting with the team. Every player in the National Football League fills out information at that meeting, connecting them to the workers' comp lawyer. We give them the ability to get all of their records every year for all of their injuries, advising them of when they need to file for workers' comp. We've increased the obligations on the league under the new collective bargaining agreement, where the league every year is mandated to tell the player in writing every record of every injury they suffered. And if we do that, Darren, we end up in a world where players can get lifetime health care for the injuries they suffer at work in a way where it doesn't count against the salary cap.
DeMaurice, I want to ask you, because I know you were reported as saying that you wanted the agents to work together. I'm not going to say the C word, but to work together to make sure that even though the salary cap dropped, that they didn't take quote unquote hometown discounts for their players, whether they were re-signing with the team or going elsewhere. One, are you happy with that? And then 2, to follow up on that, do you think Patrick Mahomes made a mistake not forcing the Chiefs to give him a fully guaranteed contract last year when he had the leverage and he also took a small amount of guaranteed money? So,
yeah, I when it comes to individual players' contracts, I think that it is imperative that they have a great contract advisor. And at the end of the day, in the same that we were talking about in the same that we're talking about off-season workouts, it's a choice. that an informed person can make, and they should just make their informed choice. So I never get into specific deals by specific players. It's their choice. By the way, you can say the word collude.
Yeah.
It is okay. It is okay and legally permissible for employees in our system to collude. It's legal. So, am I happy that with the way that agents work together during the off season? I would give it overall less than a B. And here's why. Because we have a system where we only have 2,500 workers and we have a minimum wage salary system, there are two main things that everybody should be working on together. One is, if you have similarly situated players, you should be working on ensuring that they get the highest return for their work in our system. And second, you should make sure that no NFL player signs a less optimally worded contract than another player. To give you an example, we had an agent this year, and I won't name him because it's Sunday and I'm in a nice mood. So we had an agent this year agree to terms in an NFL player's contract that contained detrimental language that the NFLPA had effectively removed from those contracts years ago. And the reason why this agent included that bad language can only be two possibilities. Either he willfully wanted bad language into the contract, and I have a hard time believing that that's the case, or he didn't know that we had effectively got that language out of most of our contracts, and by failing to work with our salary cap administration at the NFLPA, the team snuck that language back in, and the agent agreed to it. That is awful. That's just awful. And that, if it's the latter that happened, it happened because the agent wasn't colluding with the union in order to make sure that contract language was the best contract language for our membership. And the next logical extension to that, of course, is while too many people believe that guaranteed contracts are a creature of collective bargaining agreements, let me just say for probably the 700th time, they're not. The MLB collective bargaining agreement doesn't guarantee their contracts. The NBA collective bargaining agreement does not guarantee their contracts. The language in both of those collective bargaining agreements is almost identical to the language in the NFL collective bargaining agreement. What happened in both baseball and basketball, in order to usher in almost uniform guaranteed contracts for most of the players, not all the players, but most of the players, is free agent players at a time decided that they were not going to agree to anything less than a fully guaranteed contract. And the best example of that was doing the research on the difference between Moses Malone's contract back in the day and Larry Bird's contract back in the day. Moses Malone broke the bank when he did his contract. It was the largest contract in the history of the NBA, had the best contract language in the history of the NBA. But at least $6 or $7 million of his contract depended on incentives that could be met if he reached certain playing accolades, All-Star, deep in the playoffs, and other things that were up to him to achieve. The very next year, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years after he broke the bank, Larry Bird, 2 years af agreed to his free agent contract. Interestingly, it was for the same amount that Moses Malone's contract was. The only difference, Larry Bird, for the first time in the NBA, had all of that money 100% guaranteed, regardless of whether he reached certain player performance standards. Their collective bargaining agreement did not change between Moses Malone and Larry Bird. What did change? An agent making a decision that his free agent player was going to have better contract terms by using his leverage.
All right, we're joined by DeMaurice Smith live on Sports Radio 810 WHB, the ship with Darren Smith. Got a few more questions. So just so you know, we kind of tighten the answers and responses because I want to try to get to as many as I can. Do you expect expansion in the near future to help owners replace the lost revenue?
Expansion of I don't know.
Maybe teams, in additional teams.
No, I don't.
Okay.
We got through COVID in a tremendous way, but I'm not looking or expecting any expansion.
The audience, for our audience and those listening around the country, you don't understand how the new TV contract deal works. Of course, 11 years, $113 billion. The NFL has an out after 7 years to renegotiate if they want. And how does it benefit the players when it comes to revenue sharing? Could you explain that, please?
Well, we get 55% of television revenue, and obviously a large majority of the salary cap on our side is made up of TV contracts. I think the league being in a position to opt out in 7 years is good for players. I don't think that having an opt out for collective bargaining contracts is necessarily good for players. Think of it this way. The league wants an opt-out in order to leverage more money out of the TV networks in the future. An opt-out in our collective bargaining agreement would allow the league to leverage to get more money out of us during a collective bargaining agreement. So for the same reason that they want to use the opt-out to shake down TV broadcasters in the future, well, that's exactly what they would want to do if they had an opt-out in the collective bargaining agreement.
The new gambling situation, does that trickle down to players and former players, or is it strictly part of the owner's designated gross revenue?
No, it is. Well, we don't have anything called designated gross revenue in our system. We have an all-revenue system.
Okay.
Where under the new collective bargaining agreement, we're guaranteed of no less than 48% of all revenue annually. Under the new collective bargaining agreement, we were able to capture all gambling revenue to be a part of the money that comes to players.
All right, that's good to know. With the NFL draft again coming up this week, you'll soon be met with more members to the union. What's your message to these players that are about to have their lives forever changed?
Well, I think it's to look where you came from and look where you are. The work that most of these players are going to be asked to do is no different than the work that they did for 4 years in college. The primary differences are you're getting paid, you've got better health care, and you have better control over your situation than you had in college, primarily and only because you have a union. You're not going to join any NFL family because you're not in the will. That's the message for every player.
Will you have an in-person Rookie Symposium, or will that be virtual again?
The question is, the jury is out on that. We're considering it now based on where we are in the country with COVID, but we'll make a decision about that in the near future.
And obviously, for every success story that you have in the NFL, you'll have an unfortunate one like an Isaiah Wilson or a Kamal Silverman. What message would you what message would you give to those young players or those players coming in to avoid making those same mistakes?
Well, I mean, look, this is a business, and you have a short, statistically 3.5 year career on average. you have a short earnings window, the advice to them would be the advice that I would give to anyone, and especially advice I would give to my own children. If you had a 3-year earning window at this level, and what would you do in order to maximize your savings? We have a world now where everybody starts immediately jumping to, well, players need to invest in this or invest in that, or make their money grow this way, that way. The average minimum wage for most men of our players' age is far less than $50,000, right? Our players are coming into a league where no one is going to earn less than $600,000. So if you wanted to advise a group of young people on maximizing their opportunities, I would spend more time with them maximizing how to budget and how to save rather than how to invest. We need to walk strongly before we run. And those savings will be the kind of thing that can not only propel you into the next career, because you should have another career. Those are the things that I would talk to players about. Setting yourself up for that next transition, setting your family up for that next transition. That's what the conversation should be.
You're obviously going to probably have conversations with the NFL as it relates to fans and, coming back to the game and, getting up to 100%. Where does the union stand on that as it relates to maybe going back out to the team's original training camp sites? Let's say Kansas City going back to St. Joe and having fans in attendance. Where does the union feel about that? Do you want fans to have their vaccination cards and be vaccinated if you're going to be around the NFL players and stuff, whether it's training camp or at the games?
Yeah, I mean, our focus is how do we keep our players safe?
Yeah,
and so I don't really have an opinion about whether fans should be vaccinated or not. It seems to me that the primary question should be how do we work with the teams in order to ensure the safety of the players, and that's a determination on access to fans, where fans are at training camp, where fans are at the stadiums. When it comes to revenue, the second largest bucket of revenue comes from fan attendance. And I think if we can do that safely in our communities, then that's great. If we can't do that safely in our communities, then I think it's good for the community and the country that we focus on health and safety of everyone, not just how much money we can make in the National Football League.
We talked a little bit to start the show off with you about the CBA and the players voting and what they did, of course, getting fans and Americans to come out and vote. Are you disappointed that 20% of your players' union did not vote during the last CBA? Because I know it passed by a slim margin of about 60 votes, but you have a player. I think you have think about 2,500 players, but only about a little over 2,000 voted.
I'm not. I would love to have 100% participation of our membership, but Darren, flip it around. That means 80% of our membership voted, right? At what point have you and I ever seen an election in the country where 80% of Americans voted on anything?
Well, if you ask for country, I'd say Iraq, but since you said Americans, then yeah, that's different. Yeah, I'm with you. It just, and I said it because obviously it passed, and you wanted it to pass. But of course, if you look at articles that came out afterwards, there were players who wanted to change their votes. And, and look, I've always been a big deal of you can't argue about, what you come to agree with, if you didn't get out there and vote. I mean, because I know talking to you throughout the year, when you were traveling to each team, you let them know what was coming ahead and what was going to happen. And so players had the opportunity to vote and voice their opinion. They didn't. So I'm saying, obviously it's a democracy. You don't have to vote or whatever if you choose not to. But did it surprise you, I guess, is more or less the question, that so many did not vote but didn't want to complain about, what took place afterwards.
Well, the second part of your question, if you don't want to participate in the system and then you want to complain about it, I think whether we're talking about football or the country, that's a problem, right? I think that at the end of the day, we ended up with a very good deal for players, where I know that some owners, if they would have had their druthers, they would have rather pulled this deal off the table because they knew what was coming with COVID, and they were concerned that the deal was too favorable for players given the economic headwinds that were coming. So for us, I'm obviously happy that the deal passed. The NBA, MLB, and hockey both had to agree to escrows during the season. We did not. All of those sports did not play a full season. We played a full season. And each and every one of our players got paid 100% of what was coming to them in their salary, even though we were off by $4 billion last year. $4 billion. So if anybody else can show me a business in America where everybody got paid their full freight, even though the business suffered a $4 billion loss, I'll wait to demonstrate that one to me. But we were only able to do that because we had a long-term deal where we could structure handling a loss like that with an eye towards future money that would be coming into the league. And that ended up being a great benefit to our players.
I've got to ask, you've been in this position for well over a decade. Don't look like you've aged a bit, so but how much longer? How much longer do you see yourself doing this? But more importantly, are you looking at what could be down the road that you're preparing for a fight that fans and media may not see coming?
Yeah, and I'd rather not tell you what that fight is, because sometimes you have to keep a couple of hedges against the owners. There are 2 or 3 significant things that are bound to come up over the next within the next 5 years that we need to prepare for. People look at this off season and players making a choice about their own health care and their own exposure to injuries. Let's just say that this push to make players aware of their own power and their voice over their own healthcare is something that is going to be another fight down the road. And in order to set that up, we just had to remind some players that this is voluntary. And yeah, there's always going to be someone who is going to give you an excuse to go to work for free, right? You need to exercise what's in your best interest, and you also have to realize that there are groups of players who have a tremendous amount of bargaining leverage, and some players who don't have a lot of bargaining leverage. And every now and then, we're going to have to be reminded that those with a lot of bargaining leverage are going to have to understand their fiduciary duty and I would say their obligation to those players who don't have a lot of leverage, and use their leverage and their voice in order to take care of everybody in the locker room. And our former president, Eric Winston, used to say that a lot. It's okay for players in the National Football League to look out for each other and take care of each other.
Can't argue with that. Really appreciate your time, DeMaurice. I can't thank you enough for giving me the full hour on Today At Least Radio Speak. We do have to take some commercial breaks right now, but I want to thank you for your time. Go ahead.
Go get that money.
Yes, sir. Look forward to talking to you again in the near future. All the best. I know you celebrated a birthday last week. Happy birthday to you as well. And we'll take this time again. Listen to what he said. One thing for fans, if you haven't had a chance to, please go get shots so you can enjoy NFL football this fall with our players. DeMaurice Smith, thank you so very much for your time. We'll take a quick time out. You're listening to The Ship right here on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
Just Cameron Champ.
Man, that is a